Millions watched the moment unfold on screens around the world. The sleek, silver private jet sitting motionless on the tarmac, a symbol of unimaginable wealth brought to a sudden, jarring halt. But what they saw, the frustrated billionaire pacing, beside his grounded marvel, the frantic flurry of mechanics was just the surface. They didn't see the truth of the man who stepped forward, the grease-stained hands that would touch a fortune, the quiet despair in his eyes, or the chilling command whispered just out of earshot. They didn't know the story of Leo, a mechanic, fighting to keep his head above water, whose life was about to collide with a force that could either crush him or lift him to impossible heights. Leo wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, the late afternoon sun beating down on the cracked asphalt of the small regional airport. Another long day, another handful of routine oil changes and tire rotations, barely enough to cover the rent on his cramped apartment above the garage. He loved his work, the logic of engines, the satisfying click of a wrench tightening a bolt, the hum of a perfectly tuned machine. But love didn't pay the bills, not anymore. Not in a world that seemed to increasingly value flash over substance, quick fixes over meticulous craftsmanship. He saw the younger mechanics, fresh out of trade school, eager to jump into the world of diagnostics with their fancy tablets and wireless sensors, while he still preferred the feel of the metal, the subtle vibration that told him more than any digital readout ever could. He was a dinosaur in a rapidly evolving ecosystem, and the meteor was getting closer. His daughter, Maya, was the reason he kept going. Her bright eyes, her infectious laugh, the way she'd throw her arms around his neck when he came home smelling of oil and sweat. She deserved more than this hand-to-mouth existence. She deserved a chance at a better life, a life free from the constant worry that gnawed at him like a persistent rust spot. He pictured her, bent over her homework, her brow furrowed in concentration, and a pang of guilt shot through him. He promised her a trip to the coast, a chance to see the ocean she'd only ever seen in pictures, a promise he was struggling to keep. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. The garage was quiet now, the last customer having driven. Off an hour ago, the fading rumble of their engine a lonely sound in the stillness. He looked around the cluttered space, the tools neatly organized on pegboards, the lingering smell of gasoline and grease a familiar comfort. This was his sanctuary, his domain. But it was a crumbling one. The rent was due in 2 weeks and he was still $1,000 short. He'd considered selling some of his tools, the vintage snap-on set his father had given him, but the thought felt like a betrayal. It was like selling a piece of his own history, his own identity. He walked over to his workbench, littered with spare parts and half-finished projects. A small framed photo sat among the chaos. Maya, beaming, holding up a drawing of a bright, red car with wings. "You can fix anything, Daddy," she'd written on it in wobbly letters. He picked it up, a lump forming in his throat. He had to fix this. He had to find a way. Just then the office door creaked open, and Maria, his only employee, a no-nonsense woman with a kind smile and a knack for keeping his chaotic life in order, poked her head in. "Leo," she said, her voice low, a hint of worry in her eyes. "There's a call, emergency. Says it's about Mr. Sterling's jet." Leo's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Sterling, the billionaire, the man whose name was synonymous with power and extravagance. His private jet was a legend in aviation circles, a flying palace, and it was grounded, here at this small forgotten airport. He wiped his hands on a rag, his mind racing. A billionaire's jet, the kind of job that could pay the bills and then some, but the kind of job that also came with immense pressure, with the weight of expectation from someone who was used to getting what he wanted instantly. He walked into the cramped office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. Maria was holding the phone, her expression unreadable. He took a deep breath and took the receiver. "Leo Walker, Walker's Garage," he said, his voice steady, belying the tremor in his hands. The voice on the other end was crisp, authoritative, and impatient. "Mr. Walker, this is Mr. Sterling's Chief of Staff. Mr. Sterling's jet has experienced a critical malfunction on the tarmac at your airport. We require immediate assistance. We understand you are the only certified mechanic available." Leo's mind went into overdrive. Critical, malfunction, On the tarmac at his airport, he was the only one. The weight of it settled on his shoulders, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just a broken-down car. This was a multi-million-dollar aircraft, carrying a man who could probably buy and sell his entire town without blinking. "Yes, sir," Leo said, his voice a little hoarse. "I understand. Can you describe the issue?" The Chief of Staff gave a brief technical description of a hydraulic system failure. Leo listened intently, his years of experience kicking in. It sounded serious, complex, not something you could fix with a quick patch. "I see," Leo said, his mind already picturing the intricate network of pipes and valves. "I'll need to see it myself to assess the full extent of the damage. I'll head over to the tarmac immediately." "Excellent," the Chief of Staff said, a note of relief in his voice. "Mr. Sterling is eager to depart. Time is of the essence." Understatement of the year, Leo thought. Eager to depart. Of course he was. Billionaires didn't wait. The world waited for them. He hung up the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the opportunity he'd been waiting for. A chance to prove himself, to earn enough to give Maya the life she deserved. But it was also a gamble. If he failed, if he couldn't fix it, the consequences could be disastrous, not just for his reputation, but for his future. Maria was watching. Him, her eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and hope. "You can do it, Leo," she said, her voice soft. "You're the best." He managed a small smile. "Thanks, Maria. Wish me luck." He grabbed his toolbox, the familiar weight a comforting presence in his hand. As he walked out of the garage and towards the airport, the setting sun cast long shadows across the tarmac. The air was still and quiet, the only sound the distant hum of air traffic. And then he saw it. The jet, a magnificent gleaming silver bird, grounded, its wings clipped by a mechanical failure. It sat there like a wounded eagle, a symbol of power brought low. And standing beside it, a small figure radiating impatience and frustration, was Mr. Sterling himself. Leo took a deep breath and started walking. The fate of a billionaire's journey and the future of a struggling mechanic hung in the balance. The wind picked up, whipping his hair around his face, carrying with it the scent of jet fuel and the unspoken promise of either triumph or disaster. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was more than just a job. This was a test, and he had to pass it. He had to, for Maya, for himself. He walked towards the jet, towards the man who held his future. In his hands, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama that no one could have predicted. The silence on the tarmac was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the frantic thoughts swirling in Leo's mind. He was about to step into a world he only saw on television, a world of unimaginable wealth and power, a world where a single mistake could have devastating consequences. And he was just a mechanic from a small town, with grease under his fingernails, and a daughter who believed he could fix anything. He hoped she was right. He really hoped she was right. The closer Leo got to the jet, the more imposing it seemed. It wasn't just a machine. It was a statement, a declaration of status, a monument to success. And it was broken. Standing beside it, his arms crossed, his face a mask of barely contained fury, was Mr. Sterling. Even from a distance, Leo could feel the intensity of the man's frustration radiating off him like heat waves from the tarmac. He was surrounded by a small entourage, the Chief of Staff, a couple of burly security guards, and a woman in a perfectly tailored suit who looked like she was about to spontaneously combust from stress. Leo approached cautiously, his toolbox clutched in his hand. The Chief of Staff, a tall, severe-looking man with a clipped British accent, stepped forward. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice formal and clipped, "thank you for coming so quickly." Leo nodded, his eyes on the jet. "Just doing my job, sir." Mr. Sterling turned, his gaze sharp and piercing. He was shorter than Leo had expected, but his presence filled the space around him. His eyes, the color of glacial ice, seemed to bore right through him. "You're the mechanic?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Yes, sir." Leo Walker. Sterling's eyes scanned him, taking in his worn work clothes, the faint smell of oil that clung to him. Leo felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over him. He was acutely aware of the contrast between his humble appearance and the opulent surroundings. "And you believe you can fix my jet?" Sterling asked, his tone skeptical, dismissive. It wasn't a question seeking information, it was a challenge. Leo met his gaze, his own eyes steady. He wouldn't be intimidated, not now, not when so much was riding on this. "I won't know until I've had a look, sir, but I'm a certified aircraft mechanic. I've worked on hydraulics before." Sterling grunted, a sound of impatience. "Well, don't just stand there, look, and be quick about it. I have a very important meeting in Geneva I am now missing." "Yes, sir." Leo walked towards the jet, his mind already switching gears, focusing on the technical problem. He needed to ignore the billionaire, the pressure, everything else. He needed to focus on the machine. He circled the aircraft, his eyes scanning the fuselage, looking for any external signs of the problem. The chief of staff followed him, providing more details about the malfunction. It was a loss of pressure in one of the main hydraulic systems, specifically the one controlling the landing gear and flaps. A critical system. Leo opened the access panel to the hydraulic bay, the air thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid. He pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dim light. The bay was a complex maze of pipes, hoses, and valves. He began his inspection, his fingers tracing the lines, looking for leaks, kinks, or any other abnormalities. He could feel the tension radiating from the group behind him, their impatience a palpable force. He spent the next hour meticulously examining the system, his concentration absolute. He checked the pressure gauges, tested the valves, and followed the lines through the aircraft's belly. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The air grew cooler, but Leo was oblivious to everything but the task at hand. He found it eventually, a hairline crack in a high-pressure hydraulic line near a fitting that was notoriously difficult to access. It was small, almost invisible to the naked eye, but it was enough to cause a catastrophic loss of pressure. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his pants. He turned to face Sterling, who was watching him with an impatient frown. "I found the problem, sir," Leo said, his voice calm. "There's a crack in one of the main hydraulic lines. It's a difficult spot to reach, but it's fixable." Flicker of something, relief, crossed Sterling's face, quickly replaced by his usual stern expression. "Fixable? How long will it take?" "I'll need to patch the line and then replace the fitting," Leo explained. "It's not a quick job. It's going to take several hours, maybe more, depending on how difficult it is to access the fitting." Sterling's face darkened. "Several hours? Unacceptable. I need to be in Geneva tonight." "Sir, with all due respect, this is not a simple repair," Leo said, trying to keep his voice even. "It's a critical system. It needs to be done right. I can't rush this." Sterling took a step closer, his eyes narrowed. "You understand who I am, Mr. Walker? You understand the value of my time?" "Yes, sir, I do," Leo said, holding his ground. "But I also understand the importance of safety. I won't compromise the integrity of the repair, not on an aircraft." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The chief of staff shifted uncomfortably. The security guards stood rigid, their hands clasped in front of them. Sterling stared at Leo for a long moment, his gaze unblinking. Leo could feel the weight of his power, the unspoken threat in his silence. He was used to people bending to his will, to obstacles disappearing with a wave of his hand. And here he was being told he had to wait by a simple mechanic. Finally, Sterling spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You will fix it, and you will fix it quickly. I don't care how you do it. Just get it done." "I will fix it, sir," Leo said firmly. "As quickly as safely possible." Sterling scoffed, turning away. "Chief of Staff, ensure this man has everything he needs, and ensure he understands the urgency of the situation." "Yes, sir," the Chief of Staff replied, his voice a little strained. As Sterling walked away, the Chief of Staff turned to Leo, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Mr. Walker, you must understand. Mr. Sterling is not a patient man, and this meeting is..." Extremely important. I understand, Leo said, though he doubted the Chief of Staff truly understood the pressure he was under. He wasn't just fixing a jet. He was fixing a billionaire's schedule, and that felt like a far more daunting task. He spent the next few hours working tirelessly, the small access bay cramped and uncomfortable. He had to contort his body into awkward positions to reach the damaged line. The fitting was indeed difficult to access, hidden behind a tangle of other components. He worked by the light of his headlamp, the only sound the rhythmic clinking of his tools and the occasional frustrated grunt. He felt the exhaustion creeping in, the long day catching up with him. His hands were sore, his back ached, and his mind was a whirlwind of technical calculations and the constant pressure to work faster. He thought of Maya, of the promise he'd made her. That image fueled him, pushing him to keep going, even when his body screamed for him to stop. At one point, Sterling himself reappeared, hovering nearby, watching him work with an intensity that made Leo's skin crawl. He didn't say anything, just observed, his presence a constant reminder of the stakes. Leo tried to ignore him, focusing on the delicate task of patching the line. He had to be precise. The smallest error could have catastrophic consequences. The hours dragged on. The sky outside turned from a deep blue to a starry black. The Chief of Staff brought him water and a sandwich, which he ate quickly, his eyes never leaving his work. The pressure mounted with every passing minute. He could feel the weight of expectation, the silent demand for speed and perfection. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he finished the repair. He had patched the line, replaced the fitting, and bled the system. He double-checked his work, his eyes scanning every connection, every valve. It looked good. It felt right. He closed the access panel and straightened up, stretching his aching back. He was covered in grease and sweat, his clothes smeared with hydraulic fluid. He looked like he'd been through a war, and in a way, he had. A war against time, against pressure, against the limitations of his own body. He walked over to where Sterling was standing, his heart pounding with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "Sir," he said, his voice raspy, "I've finished. The repair. The system should be operational now." Sterling stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Leo's face. There was no sign of relief, no acknowledgement of the effort Leo had put in, just the same stern, demanding expression. "And you are certain it will hold?" Sterling asked, his voice low and intense. "Yes, sir," Leo said, meeting his gaze. "I'm certain. I've been doing this for a long time. I stand by my work." Sterling stared at him for a long moment, his eyes searching Leo's face. Leo held his breath, waiting. This was the moment of truth. Had he done enough? Had he met the impossible standard set by this powerful man? Then a slow smile spread across Sterling's face. It wasn't a warm smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. "Good," he said, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken sentiments. "Excellent." Leo felt a wave of relief wash over him, so strong it almost brought him to his knees. He had done it. He had fixed the billionaire's jet. He had met the challenge. "Chief of Staff," Sterling said, turning to his aide, "prepare the jet for immediate departure, and ensure Mr. Walker is compensated appropriately." "Yes, sir," the Chief of Staff replied, a hint of relief in his own voice. As the ground crew began their preparations for departure, Leo stood there, watching the scene unfold. He was exhausted, his body screaming for rest, but he felt a surge of pride. He had done something that few others could have done. He had saved a billionaire's day, and in doing so, he had potentially saved his own future. He watched as Sterling boarded the jet, the Chief of Staff and the woman in the tailored suit following closely behind. The security guards remained on the tarmac, their eyes scanning the surroundings. As the engines whined to life, a powerful roar filling the night air, Leo felt a sense of closure. It was over. He could go home. He could tell Maya that the trip to the coast was back on. But as the jet began to taxi towards the runway, something unexpected happened. Sterling appeared at the door of the aircraft, his face visible in the dim light of the cabin. He looked directly at Leo, and for a brief moment their eyes met. There was no gratitude in Sterling's gaze, no acknowledgement of Leo's efforts. Instead, there was something else, something cold and calculating. And then Sterling raised his hand and made a small, almost imperceptible gesture to one of the security guards standing nearby. It was a movement so subtle, so quick, that if Leo hadn't been watching closely, he would have missed it. The security guard nodded, a grim expression on his face. He turned and began walking towards Leo, his pace slow and deliberate. A chill went down Leo's spine. What was happening? What did that gesture mean? His mind raced, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The initial relief he had felt evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The security guard approached him, his eyes unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, his hand casually resting on his belt, near where a holstered weapon was visible. "Mr. Walker," the guard said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Sterling has a final instruction." Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. The air suddenly felt thin, suffocating. He looked from the guard to the jet, which was now moving faster, heading towards the runway. Sterling imagined. His triumph had turned into a nightmare, and the man he had helped was now posing a chilling threat. The guard's hand tightened on Leo's arm, his grip firm and unyielding. The roar of the jet engines was deafening now, a physical force that vibrated through the ground. Leo's mind reeled, trying to process the guard's words, the cold, dead look in his eyes. "Make sure you don't talk about this." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with an implied threat that left no room for misinterpretation. Panic flared in Leo's chest, hot and suffocating. He looked past the guard, his eyes fixed on the jet as it hurtled down the runway, gathering speed. Sterling was still visible in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the brightly lit cabin, watching him. A wave of nausea washed over Leo. This wasn't about the repair anymore. This was something far more sinister. "Let go of me," Leo said, his voice trembling. A desperate attempt to sound defiant. He tried to pull his arm away, but the guard's grip was like iron. The guard's face remained impassive. "Mr. Sterling is a very private man, Mr. Walker. He doesn't like loose ends." Loose ends. The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. Leo finally understood. Sterling wasn't just worried about the details of the malfunction getting out. He was worried about Leo himself, a small-town mechanic who had seen too much, who knew too much. In Sterling's world, people like Leo were liabilities, and liabilities were dealt with. Permanently. The jet lifted off the ground, its engines screaming, climbing into the night sky. Leo watched it go, a symbol of the world he had briefly touched, the world that was now threatening to swallow him whole. The chief of staff and the woman in the tailored suit had disappeared into the airport terminal. Only the security guards remained on the tarmac, their eyes fixed on Leo. The guard holding him tightened his grip. "Come with me, Mr. Walker. We need to discuss this further. Discuss this further." Leo knew what that meant. He wasn't being taken for a chat. He was being taken somewhere he wouldn't be found. His mind flashed to Maya, her smiling face, her innocent belief in him. He couldn't let this happen. He had to get away. He looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. The tarmac was vast and empty, illuminated by the airport lights. The terminal building seemed a million miles away. The other security guards were closing in, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators cornering their prey. I haven't told anyone anything," Leo stammered, desperately trying to reason with the guard. "I just fixed the jet, that's all." The guard's grip didn't loosen. "That may be so, but Mr. Sterling is a cautious man. He prefers to be thorough." Thorough. Another word that sent a shiver of dread down Leo's spine. He knew he couldn't talk his way out of this. He had to act. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding like a drum. He had one chance, one desperate chance. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Leo twisted his arm, pulling free from the guard's grip. He stumbled back, his eyes darting between the guard and the open tarmac. The guard was momentarily surprised, but his reaction was swift. He lunged forward, reaching for Leo. Leo dodged to the side, his movements clumsy but fueled by pure terror. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. He ran, his feet pounding on the asphalt, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. The security guards were right behind him, their heavy footsteps a terrifying counterpoint to his own frantic breathing. He could hear them shouting, their voices harsh and urgent. He ran blindly, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He glanced over his shoulder and saw them gaining on him. They were faster, stronger, and they were armed. He needed a plan. He couldn't just keep running in the open. He needed cover, a place to hide. His eyes scanned the tarmac, searching for anything that could offer him a moment of respite. He saw a row of parked service vehicles in the distance. A chance. A slim chance. He veered towards them, pushing himself harder, ignoring the burning in his chest. The guards were closing in, their shouts growing louder. He could almost feel their breath on his neck. He reached the vehicles, diving behind a large fuel truck. He crouched low, his body trembling, trying to catch his breath. The sound of the guards' footsteps grew louder, closer. He could hear them talking, their voices low and urgent. They were searching for him, fanning out, trying to cut off his escape. He stayed perfectly still, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was trapped, surrounded. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Maya's face. He had to get back to her. He had to survive this. He heard footsteps approaching his hiding spot. They were slow, deliberate. They knew he was here. He squeezed, his eyes shut, bracing himself for the inevitable. He was just a mechanic. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had gotten caught in something far bigger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The footsteps stopped. He held his breath, his body rigid with fear. Silence. Then a voice, low and menacing, right beside the P. Truck? Come on out, Mr. Walker. Don't make this any harder than it has to be. Leo didn't move. He couldn't. He was frozen, paralyzed by fear. He heard a click, the sound of a safety being disengaged. He knew he was out of options. He couldn't hide forever. He opened his eyes and slowly, reluctantly, rose from behind the fuel truck. The guard who had been holding him was standing there, his arm extended, a handgun pointed directly at Leo's chest. His face was a mask of grim determination. The other guards were fanned out behind him, their weapons drawn. There was no escape. Leo looked at the guard, at the gun pointed at him. He thought of Maya, of the life he was about to lose. A wave of sadness, of regret, washed over him. He had just wanted to fix the jet, to earn some money, to give his daughter a better life. He had never intended for any of this to happen. "Please," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't do this." The guard's expression didn't change. His finger tightened on the trigger, and then, from the distance, a siren. Faint at first, then growing louder, closer. The guards exchanged quick glances, their expressions shifting from grim determination to surprise, then to alarm. The siren wailed, a piercing sound in the quiet night. Red and blue lights flashed in, the distance growing brighter as they approached the airport. The guard with the gun hesitated, his aim wavering slightly. What was happening? Who was coming? The siren grew louder, closer. The flashing lights were visible now, cutting through the darkness. It was a police car, or several police cars. The guards were clearly rattled. They lowered their weapons slightly, their eyes darting towards the approaching sirens. Leo seized the opportunity. With a sudden burst of desperate energy, he lunged forward, not towards the guards, but past them, towards the lights and the sound of the sirens. He ran as fast as he could, his legs pumping, his lungs burning. He could hear the guards shouting behind him, their footsteps pounding on the tarmac. But the sirens were closer now, a beacon of hope in the darkness. He ran towards the flashing lights, towards the promise of safety. He didn't look back. He just ran. He reached the edge of the tarmac, where the police cars were pulling up, their tires squealing on the asphalt. Officers were jumping out, their hands on their weapons, their faces grim. Leo stumbled towards them, breathless, his body trembling. "Help me," he gasped, collapsing onto the ground, his legs giving out beneath him. They tried to kill me." The officers looked from Leo to the security guards who had stopped pursuing him and were now standing rigidly on the tarmac, their faces unreadable. One of the officers, a woman with a kind but firm expression, knelt beside Leo. "Who tried to kill you?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "Them," Leo said, pointing a trembling finger towards the security guards. "Mr. Sterling's men. He didn't want me to talk about what happened." The officer followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing. She turned to the other officers, giving them a silent signal. They moved towards the security guards, their hands still on their weapons. The guards offered no resistance. They stood there, their faces blank, their earlier menace replaced by a cold, calculated stillness. As the officers began questioning the guards, Leo lay on the ground, his body shaking, the adrenaline slowly draining away. He looked up at the night sky, at the stars that seemed to mock his recent brush with death. The jet was long gone, a tiny speck in the vast expanse of the universe. He had survived. He had escaped. But he knew this wasn't over. Mr. Sterling was a powerful man, a man who didn't like loose ends, and Leo was a very loose end. He closed his eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He had fixed a billionaire's jet, and in doing so he had stumbled into a world of danger and intrigue he could never have imagined. His life had been changed forever, not by the money he might have earned, but by the chilling threat he had faced. He thought of Maya again, of her drawing of the car with wings. He had fixed the jet, but he had also unleashed something far more terrifying. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew it wouldn't be simple. He had crossed paths with a billionaire, and that path had led him to the brink of death. The story wasn't over. It had just begun, and Leo knew with a chilling certainty that he was now in a fight for his life. The quiet mechanic had been thrust into a world of shadows and secrets, and he had to find a way to navigate it, to protect himself, and to get back to the